Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar entitled From Principles to Practice, Case Studies of Voluntary Principles Implementation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Maura Johnson. I'm the head of the Voluntary Principles Secretariat. Also from the Secretariat, we have Tristy and Jose, who are invisible, but they're behind the scenes putting on this event. Today, we're privileged to hear from a distinguished panel about innovative examples of in-country implementation of the voluntary principles. We'll also hear about challenges in advancing implementation. So now let me, please, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Frédéric Chenais of the Government of Switzerland. He will moderate this webinar and he will introduce the panelists. So over to you, Fred.
Thank you very much, Maura. Welcome to everybody. I mean, it's fantastic to see that we managed to gather, from all parts of the world today. The goal of this session, which is going to last for 1 hour, is to talk about implementation of the VPs in the field and really to illustrate how we can go from theory, from principle to implementation on the ground. For this, we have some great panelists with a lot of experience who are going to relate their experience in implementing the VPs during the last years. But first of all, before doing this, I have to give you some rules we are going to have to stick to. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions and not the chat function. We will take all your questions at the end and try to answer to them after the presentations as well, but as I'm sure you all know that you should mute yourself because otherwise it can become difficult to hear. So how are we going to spend this hour together? So first of all, I'm going to introduce the participants. I'm going to ask them the first questions. They are going to give an answer, sometimes with some presentations. Each participant is going to talk for a maximum of 5 minutes. Then I will go back to the participants with a second question, this time 3 minutes, and after we will open the debate for discussion. So we are lucky to have today around the table 4 panelists. We have Dr. Uju Agomo, who is joining us from Nigeria, from Abuja. You just told us, it's great that you could make it and that the technique allows us to have you with us today. Dr. Uju, you are the founder and executive director of PRAWA. PRAWA is a Nigeria-based NGO working on promoting security, justice, and development of Africa. You as well promote institutional reforms in the security sector, access to justice, rehabilitation, and social development of prisoners, ex-prisoners, torture victims, and youth at risk. PRAWA is a member of the VP working group in Nigeria. I just had a look at your website as well, and you have fantastic training material on human rights and security, so I really encourage everybody to go and have a look at it. After we have Bruce Barnaby-Rubio from Peru. You are the coordinator of the Institute for Democratic and Human Rights of the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru, which we call IDEPUC, very long acronym, but after 2 years now I know it and I hope other people as well. Bruce, you are an expert in business and human rights, as well as human rights of indigenous people. IDEPUC is currently the secretariat of the working group on business and human rights in Peru, and you are going to tell us, how you work on the implementation of the VPs as well as on the UN guiding principle in general in your country. Annie, we are happy to be together in the same room today. You are project coordinator at DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. DCAF has a MOU with VPI on implementation. You're actually a privileged partner for implementing the VP in the field. For the past 7 years, you have worked in the business and security division, which focuses on promoting multi-stakeholder approaches to support implementation of good practices in business, security, and human rights. Last but not least, Claude, voila, you are economic advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross. For the last 15 years, you have been responsible in particular for the development of ICRC relations with businesses operating in conflict zones. In this capacity, you have regularly engaged with companies in the extractive sector, and you participate as well as an observer member in the VPI. So you work with DCAF. You will as well be able to explain us how you manage to complement and how you bring an added value through implementation in the field. So let me introduce the debate, the questions. I mean, I would like that you provide us with one specific example. I mean, it can be a case study, an illustration of your efforts to move the VP from principle to practice in the field. So we are looking forward to hearing about a very practical and concrete example you're going to explain to us now. So we start with DCAF. Annie,
yes.
I'm happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and to everyone listening and to all our panelists. Yes, so I wanted to illustrate the case of DCAF's, how we developed the security and human rights implementation mechanism, and also our activities specifically in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so a very short background, but the SHRIM is really a multi-donor trust fund that supports in-country implementation of the VPs, among other also good practices in business security and human rights. And right now we have the support of Germany, Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, and the UK to foster multi-stakeholder engagement and cooperation in country and really looking at prioritizing sustainability of projects through our support for local partners by building up knowledge sharing and capacity building and linking across initiatives. And specifically to this example, here I wanted to also sort of point out the linkages that we have with the SHRIM and the due diligence guidance on responsible mineral supply chain. So very short follow-up. I wanted to take the opportunity to provide one example of a case study which shows how projects in the SHRIM come together and how this approach comes together to move to practice. But didn't specifically execute responsible context or issues around. And this is how the SHRIM group created a dedicated district city of Kivu. And so in this sense, the working group was established as a team that specialized on the security issues of the city. And it enabled the stakeholders in the DRC to have a focus on security and human rights. And to illustrate the impact of security capacity of the mining police. Reinforce this and the local community to support the investigation with the mining police and to improve the mining police's internal human rights monitoring capacity. And we can see through the incident reports and the minutes created by the working group that demonstrate how, because of the capacity building and the different efforts that go into supporting the working group, how they're able to respond to these kinds of incidents using terminology of use of force, using really built up abilities to address this, to monitor this, and to follow this incident through. And it really showed how also the VPs has been injected into this context. And thanks to this approach, the working group and the advocacy that the working group undertook at the provincial level of the mining police, so taking it up the chain, the alleged perpetrator was soon replaced with a new commander and we're still obviously monitoring the subsequent effects of that, but it does show how this kind of approach can really have an impact on preventing further human rights abuses. And with that, I'll pass to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Ami. Dr. Uyo from Nigeria, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. For us in Power, what we want to kind of showcase as one major case study here is the work we do with the law enforcement agencies. This is in terms of the police. We run several trainings on human rights for the police, both those in the training institutions, but also those at operational level. So what we then did was, first of all, to see how we infuse the principles, voluntary principles in the training resource materials that we have for them. So for example, apart from the training, the human rights training manual that we have, we also police human rights training manual, the police human rights trainers guide, there is a particular small pocket handbook that is called the police human rights pocket handbook. So what we then decided to do was to use that as an idea, and then develop a pocket handbook that actually flags those issues that relate to voluntary principles, so that the law enforcement agencies that are posted in those areas, in states where they have extractive industries, in communities where they have extractive industries, they can use this. So this is one way where we have embedded in it. So in terms of specific trainings for the human right, that actually is integrated. So for example, the picture you are seeing was the training that one of the trainings we had in River State. So River State is in the Niger Delta. We have River State. We also have Delta State. So all the special force unit of the police that participated in that training had opportunity of hearing much about voluntary principles, including many of them that have never heard anything around the voluntary principles. So that happened, and we had, for this particular one, we had first of all a 3-day training of trainers workshop for these officers, followed up with a 2-day training for the oversight mechanisms, which then enabled some players from the Ministry of Justice, Legal Aid Council, National Human Rights Commission to join those trainings. Now, in addition to having this done, we developed case studies. And these case studies now enables us to be able to utilize these principles. And case studies actually picking up on different aspects of the voluntary principles, so that irrespective of the kind of training that is happening, we are also utilizing this to make sure that many more persons are aware about the voluntary principles. Because we believe that once we can empower the law enforcement agencies, it will make things much, much easier in terms of both complying with these principles. But as we will mention in the next segment of trying to respond to these questions, you will notice that what we did was to combine this approach with also another approach, which is the building the knowledge and capacities for the general public around this. So, and we are moving ahead to mainstream many more aspects around the training for the law enforcement agencies, to make sure that apart from the training we are doing for them, physical training, that we want to make sure that we have a way that they can access this training on their own and keep on enriching themselves and enriching their knowledge on this particular issue. So I want to stop here, but to also say, because I don't know whether my 5 minutes have gone, but to just say that, one, apart from the imputing this into the training resource materials, as you have seen, we've also have specific training modules that we have now on some aspects of the voluntary principles, which they themselves can also assess and also learn a little bit about more about that, on those principles. So training and capacity building is something that is key, but we want to make sure that it is in a form that the law enforcement agencies can utilize them, can integrate them into their own training, and can also understand these principles and comply with them.
Okay, Dr. Huyo, thank you very much for sharing this very practical example on how you manage to integrate the VPs in the daily work of the police workforce. I would like now to go to Peru. Bruce, you have the floor.
And thank you. Good morning. And first, I would like to thank for the invitation to be part of this distinguished panel. And IDEPUC is the secretariat of the Working Group on Voluntary Principles in Peru since January 2019. The working group was created almost 10 years ago, thus mainly by extractive companies who wanted to address difficulties and challenges regarding social conflicts and extraction activities. Currently, there are over 25 institutions from the 3 pillars that are part of the working group, along with observers from embassies and international organizations. To answer this question, I will mention 3 specific measures that we took in order to show our efforts to move voluntary principles from principles to practice, all of them considering some important characteristics of Peruvian process. Peru is not part of the Voluntary Principles Initiative for now. The current process of designing a national action plan in business and human rights, we're currently in a process of designing this tool. And of course, COVID-19 as an important factor as well in the implementation right now. In 2018, the working group decided to enlarge its mandate, including among its framework, the United Nations and guiding principles. On 2019, the working group established as one of the outputs of its annual work plan, the preparation of a guiding document about the articulation between voluntary principles and the guiding principles. The document showed that even though these 2 instruments were adopted in different years and were addressed to different actors, and the voluntary principles and the guiding principles have several points in common. And we can summarize the findings in the documents in 3 very short ideas. First, both instruments have a starting point, the duty of state to protect human rights. Second, while the guiding principles establish due diligence duty and develops all its elements, the voluntary principles focus on risk assessment specifically. And at last, while the guiding principles establish and develop widely the right of victims to access to remedy, the voluntary outcomes should report on human rights. In the guiding principles. As Ruby said in Voluntary Principles Annual Plenary, the UN guiding principles provide high-level guidance with expectation that more granular regulation may be required for a specific sector and operating context, which is what the voluntary principles address. That is why, despite the fact that Peru is not a member of initiative, as a group, there is an opportunity window to foster its implementation. As I said before, currently the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights in Peru is in the middle of designing the National Action Plans on Business and Human Rights. And that is why, as members and secretariat of the group, we wanted to make sure that the security agenda is going to be part of the plan. That is why, as IDEPUC, we have been participating with academic inputs in the elaboration of this NAP. We are in charge of topics related to security, as you have in the site. And use of force, solutions, and extraordinary services. These inputs will foster the multi-stakeholder process. Finally, in the next outbreak, we apply 2 steering committee members. Should take the working group in this context. The first survey showed that the members of the steering committee agreed that we need to adapt our working plan to this new pandemic context. The survey showed as well that we needed also to change the priority topics for the standard meetings. For the second survey, that is the one you all have in the screen, all the members of the steering committee voted among the different proposals set by its own members, and decided by majority that the first meeting on the working groups should address the role of companies facing the challenges that COVID-19 presents on human rights. As you can also see in the graphic, there are other topics of the agenda related to public and private security, and we are currently implementing these meetings. So as you can see in the slide, we also want to address the new police normative framework. I will speak about that in the next question just a little bit. And for example, the improvements and challenges in the private security normative framework as well. That was also the topics that was part of the discussion. So I will leave also the floor here for this first question. I will give you back the floor, Frédéric. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for this also very practical example. So let us go to the ICRC with Claude. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me also thank Maura and the Secretariat for the invitation and organization of this webinar, and Annie and Frédéric for setting this up. So after traveling to the DRC, to Nigeria, and to Peru, let's go in the completely different direction, and let's go a little bit to China. And this is where I will bring you. And starting by an anecdote, when I was flying late last year from Addis Ababa to Lubumbashi, I was struck by the demographics on the of the passengers in the plane. Indeed, well, obviously the largest group of passengers were Congolese or other Africans, but then the second largest group were Asians, in particular Chinese people. And European or Westerners on the plane were very largely outnumbered by Asians. So it brings us to a new reality that we have definitely to tackle when we discuss responsible business practices. My organization, the ICRC, has started tackling this for a while and has decided that if it wants to be true to the ambition to encourage responsible business practices in challenging environment, it has to spread the word and engage with Asian and in particular Chinese stakeholders. So for the past few years, the ICRC did a number of things in China. First one being to start hiring a staff member working specifically on responsible business practices from our office in Beijing. But I'm not going to list all of these activities. I will just focus on one of them. What I want to highlight is the engagement that we have started with the China Chamber of Commerce of Metals, Minerals and Chemicals Importers and Exporters. Woo, a mouthful that I guess many of you on the call know this mouthful under its acronym of CCCMC, a large business association in China servicing Chinese companies involved in the extractive industries. With CCCMC, we put together our joint interest to support responsible business practices around extractive sites, and we decided to sign a framework agreement. And this is precisely the picture you have here. This is the day when this agreement was signed. This agreement lists a number of things that we will do together with CCCMC, but the one thing I would like to highlight is the development of training modules on responsible security management, specifically targeted at Chinese stakeholders. These training modules are being developed jointly by CCCMC, DECAF ICRC, and a third partner, which is Renmin University, which is a famous and reputable university in Beijing. The training modules should be ready in principle by the end of the year, pandemic allowing. Once they will be ready, they will be delivered through Renmin University, through CCCMC, and through DECAF ICRC networks. The plan is to use these training modules not only in Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen, but also directly in field locations across Asia, Africa, Latin America, where large numbers of Chinese companies are operating. Through this work stream, what we hope to be able to establish, very practically a solid basis for responsible business practices by Chinese stakeholders in relation to challenging security environment. We hope that with time, an ever larger number of Chinese companies beyond the extractive sector will deploy these training modules and start understanding or better understanding the value of responsible business practices, both for the company itself and for a large set of stakeholders around the company's operations. Now, what is the link to the VPI? In working on this, we are not selling the VPI. What we are selling is or encouraging responsible business practices in security environments. However, very interestingly, CCCMC is increasingly making the connection with the VPI, be it thanks to their engagement with us or thanks to their engagement with the OECD, which is another VPI observer. And CCCMC has been increasingly showing interest to explore possible avenues for engagement with the VPI. So it's interesting and important to note in this webinar. Let me just conclude this little information to say that all of this was done not only by ICRC, but in partnership with DECAF, playing on the complementarity between both our organization. And this is also an opportunity to thank our moderator, and behind our moderator to thank Switzerland, who has been supporting the DECAF ICRC project since the very beginning. And without their support, none of what has been described either by Annie or by me would have been possible. Frédéric, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Claude. I think what is very fascinating in all your presentation is you have all explained, everybody has explained actually how we managed to bring the VP, what strategy you used to bring the VP through instruments that already exist. Like Annie, I mean, you explained how you used the implementation of the OECD guidance in the DRC, and you managed to bring the VP implementation within this work that already existed, like Dr. Hujou. I mean, you looked at what curriculum was existing, what training was given, and you managed to integrate the training on the VP in this. And I mean, Peru is very impressive as well, how you are using this tool, I mean, this national action plan to bring the VP to make sure that they're addressed. I mean, in Switzerland, we do the same. We as well make sure that the VP implementation is in our national action plan. And I mean, for Claude, I liked as well when you said, when you told, actually, we were not selling the VP, we were selling good business practice, which is something you cannot contest, and through this way, you managed to bring in the VP. So, I mean, we saw a bit 4 countries, 4 different approaches, but every time a strategy that is adapted to the local context, and it's how you manage, and I think this is very interesting. I assume that, I guess, you had some challenges to address. So I would like to come back to you and to ask you to talk about these challenges and how you manage to overcome
Yeah, they are both of them related to this work I just mentioned. That's not an easy thing. CCMC on one side, DECAF ICRC on the other side, trying to work concretely together. Responsible security management is not an easy translation from French or English into Chinese. And you probably understand that I'm not speaking so much of language translation here, but rather of translation in terms of cultural backgrounds, priorities, approaches, working methods. So in this regard, we noted that physical meetings with CCCMC, and I refer here to before the pandemics, physical meetings with CCCMC, being on a field mission together with CCCMC in the DRC, and this is the illustration here of this mission that we were doing together. These 2 things tremendously helped to develop a form of common understanding, personal bonds also, as well as a form of mutual trust between these 2 blocks or these organizations. So the lesson we draw from that particular example is that developing a form of proximity is very useful in terms of identifying common challenges and structuring a cooperation around these challenges. And I think it's important at a time, as I mentioned, where when CCCMC is showing increasing curiosity vis-à-vis the Voluntary Principles initiative. The challenge number 2 I would like to highlight is that we as DECAF and ICRC, when we partner, we always like to give our partners a lot of leeway to determine what they need and where they need our support. And in this particular work with CCCMC and Renmin University, this approach came with a little bit of a surprise, in the sense that Renmin, when they were starting working on the training modules, they arrived with long suggestions of modules that they wanted to develop. And in these long suggestions of modules, many were completely irrelevant to our work and irrelevant to our capacities. So our first reflex was that we wanted to scrap all these modules that were irrelevant for us. But CCCMC, as a third block in the partnership, was insisting that these modules were very important from a Chinese perspective. So you need to include these modules from a Chinese perspective. So ultimately, we managed to settle for a form of two-tier system, which is that there will be a number of training modules that will be co-developed and co-owned by all the partners. And there will be another number of training modules that will be co-developed and co-owned only by the Chinese partners. And in these ones, we as DECAF ICRC will have nothing to do and nothing to say. The lesson that we draw here is that it was important for us to be very clear on what are our priorities and what are our capacities, while at the same time being flexible enough to find solutions that keep our partners, our Chinese partners, engaged, that keep them on board, and that keep them with a very strong sense of ownership on the project. So these are the two challenges I wanted to highlight.
Thank you very much, Claude. I mean, if you can tell us
well, assuming for the different objects in regarding the principles and particular situation of security. For some organization in regards to between companies, some in social protests. This topic serves 62 cooperation agreements between companies and the police, half of them related to extractive companies exclusively. These agreements allow to hire the police force to and give extraordinary services by members that are not in their duty hours. These police officers have to protect the company's infrastructure, which includes controlling civil society in the context of protests against the companies in rural sites of the country. On one hand, companies agree that they try to support the role of the police officers by helping them to reach some territories where they're not usually present because of their lack of resources. These are where destructive activities usually take place. On the other hand, civil society complains about the role of the police in these protests because they're supposed to protect them, not to protect only the infrastructure of the companies. This becomes highly unpopular if we take a close look to the data. From January 2016 to 2015, the Ombudsman Office here in Peru have registered 244 mortal victims and 3,875 wounded caused to social conflicts. In the last years, the number of mortal victims have decreased considerably, in part of the improvement of the use of force regulation, but the number of social conflicts remain the same. And in this topic, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights has shown some concern about the existence of this service to companies, despite the fact that constitutionally the police have a specific public function for internal order. Also, the existence of agreements added to the other measures, such as emergency declarations in context of social conflicts, generate mistrust of the part of the population regarding the role of the police as a body that guarantees the right of all. So this is one of the reasons why many members of civil society here have some resistance towards the scope of the voluntary principles and the necessity to regulate and understand this issue. This is a report written by civil society, the one you see in the slide, that gives some clues about the problem that these agreements present for the communities here in Peru. But also, and some very important challenge, that is the next slide that we have mentioned before, is the resistance from the government to be a member of this initiative. The Peruvian government, as well as many companies, have improved their standards and communication skills with civil society within extractive activities, but the government is not convinced to adopt an international framework. This is important because, and despite all the improvements in security area, and it still depends on the goodwill of the authorities. Only this year, on March, the Congress changed the regulatory framework regarding the use of force to a law that mainly tried to reduce the proportionality principle as a standard for police interventions. There have been many members of the three pillars that disagree with this legislation, but it's also and will be part of the discussion for some time. So it's one of the challenges as well that we have right now. And I give the floor back as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for explaining these challenges specific to Peru. Dr. Uyo, I may come back to you in Nigeria, if you can tell us as well about some challenges you had to overcome with VP implementation.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to just deal with just one challenge, and you can see how that actually became gave us a lot of opportunity to do so many creative things that we're so excited to share with you. And what was that challenge? That was COVID. You know, we had planned that we will have a workshop in Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt is in the River State in the Niger Delta. And this workshop, we had planned that this workshop is going to be targeting maybe about 30 or so persons, and we will get some people from the community and all that. But it was supposed to be just a manageable size of numbers. But guess what? When we had the lockdown, we had interstate movement were shut down, the airspaces were not opened. The issue about social distancing was quite a concern. And obviously, we knew there was no way we could proceed with having a physical workshop as we had earlier on intended. So we discussed with our partners, DCAF, and mentioned that we needed to make some modification, and I really want to commend them. They were very flexible. They allowed us to make that modification. Now, part of the modification we did was, now we said, instead of just having this training that would be in a hall, in one hotel, that when we now decided to have a very aggressive radio program. So we set up what is called the Voluntary Principles half hour. It's a 30 minutes program, and it covered a lot of stuff. It covered things like introduction to the voluntary principles and the rationale for it. In terms of episode 1, it looked at issues around promotion of business, friendly environment in Nigeria, and which also gave us opportunity to deal with issues around risk assessment. Then we also looked at the interaction between the public security agencies as well as the issues relating to private security, then also issues around stakeholders, consultation and all that, including issues about grievance mechanisms. How do we assess remedies? We also looked at monitoring and oversight mechanism, and then also issues about selling this voluntary principle as a win-win situation. It's for all stakeholders. It's important to note that Nigeria has not yet signed. I mean, though the working group is doing a lot of consultation, and we are hopeful that something will happen very soon around that direction. But what was happening was that we now had different radio stations, and we had radio station, in a location that is called Umuahia, which is covering quite a number of states, in Port Harcourt, in Abuja, and we had different slots. Now, apart from these general radio stations that we had, we also had the Prawa online radio, so which was every day relaying these episodes. So the radio station will have the recording, and then we upload. And I'll really be happy that I'm sure that DCAP may oblige us and maybe be willing to circulate some of these episodes around. But look at what was interesting with the program that we had earlier on planned, which is the workshop. We would have probably reached 30 persons. Guess how many people we reached? Through the combined effort of these various radio stations, we were able to reach over 12 million, 12 million people. If you looked at the issue about all the episodes put together. But then on the average, for each episode, he was getting about 1,725,297 persons. So you can imagine the magnitude of what the reach was. So in terms of public awareness, that was really helping us a lot. So, but we combined that, apart from the radio program, we combined that with the app. And so if you go to the station, and if you just type Voluntary Principles, you would see the app coming. And this was actually supposed to provide a platform for everybody. And I believe that even those who are participating in this program today can also upload them, find a way of sharing some information around on that. And so it becomes a platform that helps all of us, the community. But we find that once people can download this app on their phones and all the rest of that, and they could also be able to access information relating to voluntary principle, and and this is something that really was we were very happy to find. So apart from the radio, then we have the app. Then we also have posters. We did a lot of very creative posters, and people were very happy about some of those posters. But one of the key things that these posters gained, it's that because we found out that accessing remedy was a big challenge, in terms of how do we deal with the grievance mechanisms and how do people access remedies. So some of the posters and stickers were actually putting the contact. For example, we got the National Human Rights Commission very fully on board, and their phone numbers, their contact and all that, so that people can know that they can call hotlines at any time they wanted, and they can actually reach out to some of these things. So these were things that we did that we are quite excited about, and there's still quite a lot that we hoping that will continue, because even these activities that we have done, it's with the end of the project, we're not thinking of it ending, because imagine the episode that are recorded is uploaded on the Power Online Radio and people can listen to it, and all the things, the app is there, and we will continue to be using it, and so many, including the posters. So so I don't know whether I've gone beyond my time, but certainly we are quite excited about what came out of what's supposed to be the bad news. COVID was a bad news, but I dare say that there were a lot of very exciting, innovative things that came out of it for us, and we are very happy about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huyu, and I think the app is available on Android, and Annie's just telling me it's coming on iOS. So I tried on my iPhone, I didn't succeed 2 months ago, but she's telling me it's coming. So I think that's as well great for other countries to look at it and to see this work. I mean, can give idea. Before going to the discussion, Annie, if you as well could tell us about some challenges.
Yeah, I will go very quickly because I would like to leave some space for discussion. So I'll just address the first point there, and then if we can also discuss the shrimp grant another time. But we've maybe linked back to my first point is around the in-country working groups. But one of the things that we really encountered is that there's a multitude of in-country working groups. We have Colombia, we have 2 in Peru, we have 3 in DRC, there's Myanmar, there's, across different contexts, there's so many processes going on. And at the same time, there's never been a reflection on what works and what doesn't, and what kind of support do working groups actually need, what kind of support along the life cycle of a working group, along the different challenges that it encounters that are also context specific to the societies where they are operating. There's never really been this reflection. So some working groups are developed more closely on the OECD lines, like in DRC. Some were on the UN guiding principles, like in, for example, Peru. And there's really not been this reflection. And so to address this gap in the knowledge, DCAF and Fund for Peace, also who's a member of the VPs, we joined together to develop an in-depth study with in-country interviews and really a thorough needs assessment to scope, how to best support in-country processes when it comes to business security and human rights. And actually the study, which I'd be happy to circulate as well, it addresses what makes in-country working groups succeed and thrive, what preconditions are necessary for the establishment of a working group, also how can stakeholders come together in a meaningful way, and how to really structure discussions in an action-oriented way that show progression and impact, which is something that's also in the end important for donors. And ensuring that all voices are heard. How can we do that? How can we support working groups in that aspect? and also sustainability, and how can we support fundraising and ensuring that the good work continues and it's linked across. So the study really offers practical recommendations. There's a long study and then there's a short guidance, and it's really a sort of a how-to support in-country working group process with recommendations for the VPI, but also for other actors, including companies and participants of the working groups themselves. And just 2 words on the Security and Human Rights Grant. It's actually to address a challenge where we found we wanted to invite more voices of civil society addressing in different contexts, addressing security and human rights challenges. So last year we actually launched the second round of the Security and Human Rights Grant to invite civil society to submit proposals on human rights defenders, on media, and on gender. To really expand how we look at the voluntary principles and other good practices and how they apply in these different thematic contexts. And I'll just stop there so we have some time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Annie. I hope we can access to the Q&A. Something is changing on the screen, so it seems to be the case. Yeah, Q&A, I can see one question. It's actually a comment, fantastic, many thanks. I don't see questions so far, but I may have one question. Yes, someone wants to talk.
Yeah, there was somebody that sent a question earlier to me, and he was asking whether the pocket handbook is accessible online now. So I did mention that the initial one, which was the police pocket handbook without the VP, is online, but that this very one will also be online, but yet at the moment not yet, but it will be online. It will also be uploaded on the app, and I'm sure that, and also on our website, but I'm sure that DCAF will also use their own platforms to also disseminate. So that both that pocket handbook and every other output that have come out of this great project will definitely be made accessible so that people can use it, including the case studies, and the trial, and so many other things we have produced.
Yes, we'll make sure to link also on our upcoming, we're relaunching the Knowledge Hub for the DCAF ICRC partnership and for the SHRIM, and we'll make sure also to link closely to PRAWA's website. So those links are found in 2 places as well.
Okay, thank you, Annie. I would like maybe to ask one question more to Bruce and Dr. Uyu. I was interested to hear about your interaction with the private sector, I mean, in Nigeria, in Peru, when it comes to implementation. What kind of experiences do you do? Is it easy? Are they willing to support? Just tell a couple of words about this. I mean, Bruce, if you have some comments about that.
Yes, well, regarding private security sector in Peru, and it's been, we are currently, thanks to the Secretariat of the BPI, we are currently starting on research to create a diagnosis about the situation of the training in human rights. As a group, we were working in public and security forces in training in human rights for some time, for some years. And now we're focusing on security private sector because there is a huge increase of the number of companies that are now working in the ground here in Peru. And also because the regulatory framework is changing a lot. And right now we passed a law that was trying to create a more fortified and human rights approach to the security private sector, but we're still waiting for that law in the Congress. So we are trying to approach the necessity to approach human rights from different perspectives to increase the human rights approach in the training part, and to understand a little bit and what are the challenges among the big companies in private security sector and the not so big companies, the more informal companies as well here in different regions in Peru. So it's something that we want to approach, and that's why we're working together with the BPI right now.
The question is International Code of Conduct for Private Security, something you know about, you are using? I mean, it's another initiative based in Geneva. It's interesting to know a bit how you interact, how you see a connection with the VPs.
At CIDEPUC, we are members of ICOCA, where I actually been in the assembly last year. And we are working with many companies, the formal companies that are part as well of ICOCA here in Peru, and the extractive companies that are as well, and considering this framework. But there's many companies, not only the big ones, the formal, but also little companies that are not part of any of this initiative. So we have to strengthen the approach to from the public policy, and to gain more a human rights approach in that sector specifically.
Bruce, I don't know if someone else in the panelists wants to comment on this.
Yeah, I wanted. Should I make my comment,
yes,
or do you want afterwards?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. For us, one thing we've noticed that when we sometime last year, August, during the national conference of the Nigerian Bar Association, which is one of the biggest conferences that ever holds in Nigeria, what we did was that Prawa facilitated a platform on the voluntary principles so that at least we will use that to educate as many lawyers as possible. And during that platform, we invited the private sector. So they came in and they were part of that panel. So for them to participate in training, they didn't seem to mind. It was okay for them. But one thing we noticed is that when we were making the radio episodes, we tried reaching out the person who was in charge of the producer of the Voluntary Principles half hours, reached out to many different ones that we had contact. They could not. They said they were going to get permission from their bosses to speak, but at the end of the day, they didn't seem to be very free to speak to the media without the hierarchical thing. So that was not very, very encouraging. However, one of the things we feel that we actually tried to respond to in terms of engaging the private sector was that in terms of the draft mechanism we're talking about for dealing with grievances and complaints, with the National Human Rights Commission and Prawa worked on a particular document, which is at the moment still a draft. We want to present it to the working group because both the National Human Rights Commission and Prawa are members of the Nigerian working group. And we know we have the pillar, the government pillar, the private sector pillar, and the civil society pillar. So we want to see how that document can help discuss how all the three pillars can be fully engaged through the national working group in terms of the mechanisms for dealing with complaints, for dealing with redress and all that. But that's still work not yet done deal. But the point is that we feel that could give them the platform where they would be really, because some of the things that will come out of this should not only be dealing with the immediate complaints, we're looking at also long-term addressing some of the complaints that may come out. We think that the private sector is very, very key. So that's been our experience. With media, they don't want to get involved. With training, they don't mind. But we have to have a strategic and creative way to use them or engage them during things like negotiating remedies and all the rest of that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I see we are arriving to an end. I wouldn't like to do it longer. And I would like to go back to you for a 1-minute concluding statement. And if this statement you could maybe integrate the COVID perspective, which is actually a question from Joanne Fontaine from the UK. If you could, in your closing statement, just as well say a bit what kind of support you think is needed to continue to work in this COVID context. Maybe we start with you, Claude.
Okay, well, nothing really particular as a conclusion, just a side response to the question of COVID. Yes, obviously, it's present unprecedented challenges, including possibly when it comes to VP implementation. This being said, I think VP implementation, like all the other dimensions of our respective works is still something that can be done with COVID. You just need to move to a new way of working, to new platforms like we are doing today. And probably, maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, probably this webinar would not have taken place without COVID, because we would have had a traditional annual plenary meeting, and that would be it. So as Dr. Oujou mentioned, this is definitely a challenge, but this challenge can, as she described very vividly, can be turned into opportunities also. That's my concluding sentence.
Maybe we go to you, Bruce.
Thank you. And also addressing the COVID-19 challenges right now. Well, it is true that we need some time to adapt all our all the socialization that we do in the group through these kind of platforms. So that's something that we're currently doing and as well. And in Peru, we just finished our deconfinement. We start our deconfinement after 3 months and a half. So what we need is time to understand what is happening and within the relationship with business and human rights in general, and specifically in some rural areas when the security topics are the most important. So we need to keep looking, to keep and talking a lot with different stakeholders, and we need some time to understand all the problems that this pandemic have created in this kind of relationships. So it's something that we're doing that currently.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I may turn to Annie as well for your concluding words.
No, I mean, I agree with what our panelists have said, and maybe just to add that I think from a DCAF perspective, more in a multilateral partner perspective, and you know, the SHRIM channeling support to the working groups, I think we have to be more open and also listen very carefully and work in partnership with working groups and you know, VPs implementers in country about, you know, exactly what is needed, what are the human rights challenges that are exacerbated because of COVID, and how do we adapt projects in a way that really makes sense for partners on the ground. I think it's really important for institutions like DCAF and you know, by extension the SHRIM, to be really flexible to that, because contexts change, and you know, even more so with the social protests that are being exacerbated, you know, across different contexts. It's really important that we're able to quickly but also methodologically adapt and support our partners in a way that is in line with not only, you know, some of the studies and the research that's been done, but also, you know, really live needs assessments and reassessments. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oujou, your concluding remarks, and after we will wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. I think I will just say in very, very few words. One is the whole issue about entrenching a culture of compliance. We cannot negotiate this. That during this period, let's get people to believe in this principle, to own it, and also to see that it brings up a win-win situation. This culture of compliance needs to really be entrenched. And how do we entrench it? Let's look at how do we entrench it through how people knowledge is being grown and awareness creation. So through integrating and mainstreaming this in various training programs that they are doing and all that. So please, that's one thing I feel that this COVID have really taught us, and we really need to do more of that. The second and last point I want to make is the issue of technology. Whether we like it or not, it has come to stay, and we have found that it can really help us a lot. I mean, for example, the radio, power radio, online radio we put on, but not being able to have much awareness created about the radio, so that whatever will make these technological platforms to be more user-friendly, to be more accessible would be key. So let it be the driving force, because it can help us get the much mileage and gap scope that we need to reach. I just think that is one help that we really will require from the international in terms of dealing with the challenges that the COVID-19 had actually brought to us in respect of this.
Julie?
Yes, yes, I've vended. So just my long issue is technology is having a mainstreamed process, meaning in our day-to-day language, we need to really mainstream this so that we can see the practical side of implementing this from the principles to the practice. So it have to be a culture. We have to own this process. And I would think from experience that creation of awareness is like popularizing the whole message. We need to make people own the message, popularize it, and build the capacity through our normal programming and training program, but please, technology, it has come to stay with us. So we need to find ways of making this technology user-friendly and accessible to many.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to summarize all the presentations, but maybe just a couple of words. I mean, to say that this webinar has really shown that the VP is about implementation. I mean, it was so interesting to hear about how you adapt to your context, how you manage to find ways to go to the VP implementation, and how, I mean, it's such an exceptional thing for the VP to be replicated in different countries with local and national partners that know how to advance the agenda through their, through their structures and through their own context. One thing which is as well very encouraging to see is, I mean, the reaction all of you had with COVID. I mean, you managed to find a way to be innovative. You've found ways to still continue implementation. Sometimes it was difficult, but sometimes you as well reached more than what you had originally envisaged to reach. And I think this is very important. And I mean, of course, ownership of the projects that are in these different countries, I mean, is really something that, that will bring our agenda forward. So what I can do, I mean, is really to thank you all for having taken the time to share your experience. I mean, we of course hope that we will be able to meet at the next plenary and to continue this exchange, and as well to share all the lessons we will learn now that we are going through this deconfinement, which we hope will continue in this way and that we'll not have a second wave. So, I mean, thank you very much to everybody. Have a nice evening or a nice day, depending on what time zone you are. And I pass back to Morin. I can see you on the screen to formally close this webinar. Thank you very much.
Great.
Just before Mora, sorry, just before Mora, can I draw your attention to the fact that Almero has put a link to what he considers a very good police human rights training manuals on the chat, on the Q&A section. Almero, from our colleague from Rio Tinto, and I can tell you, if Almero says it's a good resource, it has to be a good resource. So have a look at this. Sorry, Moha.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. The webinar went a bit later than expected, so sorry about that. So I wanted to really add my voice to Fred's to say thank you so much to the panelists, just for your inspiring examples of voluntary principles in implementation and for sharing your learnings. It was a really, really fascinating hour-long discussion. I'm really grateful to you. I want to thank DCAF for organizing this excellent webinar, and certainly thank Frédéric Chenais for moderating and keeping the conversation moving so well. So thank you to all.